Hey guys, it's Bionic here. Today I'll be breaking down legendary hero kits and explaining why I think some heroes are getting overlooked while others are overrated. I will highlight why some kits may not work how you would expect them to, and how others may have more than meets the eye. We'll start with perhaps my most spicy take, that Apollo is not as good as he seems. I have seen him ranked top 5 in most tier lists. I don't think he deserves this spot, and I'll tell you why. At first glance, his kit looks crazy good with AoE mend on basic plus single target acid, then attack 2 up with a divinity boost on the core, then an ultimate with core cooldown reduction plus divinity manipulation. All tied together with a passive that increases core damage each time a core ability is used. But when you consider most battles are not going to last for more than a few rotation of core abilities, the passive may not have as much effect outside of clan boss situations. Remember, whenever an ally uses a core ability, increases the damage of their core ability by 10%. So the first core would do 0% extra damage, then the next 10, then 20, then 30, then 40% extra damage. In this scenario of using the core 5 times in one wave or boss battle, it has increased the core damage by 20% on average and overall damage by less than 10%, as there is no damage boost to the basic or ultimate abilities, which in most cases probably do more damage over the course of the battle. So, considering the damage boost to the core may not be as significant outside of really long boss fights, you might be thinking of using the ultimate to reduce the cooldown of core abilities with utility instead, such as Athena's shield or Loki's sleep, which still has great potential, but then you lose the synergy of the passive increasing core damage. The second part of Apollo's ultimate increases divinity of all allies under mend and reduces divinity of all enemies under acid by 15%. Once again, this sounds great, but is it really? Well, Apollo has an AoE mend on his basic, so this should be easy, right? Not really. This gets a bit more complicated, so I'll cover the core first so this makes more sense. The core places attack 2 up on all allies for 2 turns, then equalizes the ally with the lowest divinity to Apollo's divinity. Due to this skill having attack up 2 in it, you'd likely want Apollo to go first in your team, as well as use this skill first to boost your team's damage. The problem is that Apollo starts on 0 divinity. This means most of the time he will reduce the ally with the lowest divinity to his divinity, as most heroes start with higher divinity than Apollo. So you might be more often than not getting a debuff or no effect at all when using his core at the start of battle. Although, you could then argue to use the basic before the core to avoid this reduction in divinity, but this would mean you would have to wait until the next basic attack to put mend up on all allies before using the ultimate to get the effect of the 15% divinity boost. This would then reduce your core's cooldown ready to be used on next turn. Keep in mind you just used your ultimate and therefore will have low divinity and once again get little or no effect from the divinity equalization. Then there's the divinity reduction to enemies under acid. Unfortunately, Apollo's only way of placing acid is on his basic, which is a single target attack with only a 75% chance of placing acid when fully upgraded. Although it's not that hard to find a hero with AoE acid. But will you want them on the team is another question. I can see Hercules as a broken partner to Apollo in very long battles, as they both scale damage as the battle goes on, plus Hercules does double damage on his core already. Now, you may be thinking I'm being a bit tough on his kit or a bit picky here, but we're talking about the reality of using his kit as it currently reads. Many are putting him in S tier, some as their number 1. I could potentially agree with this if you got everything in his kit, but that's not the case. So to me he is A tier, great, but not the best. And keep in mind, this is all subject to change, and there are awakenings that may solve some of these issues. This applies to all the heroes that I'll be talking about. For one of Apollo's awakenings, I'd like to see something like equalize the ally with the lowest divinity to the ally with the highest divinity. That way it can synergize with some existing abilities or effects that benefit from a hero holding their ultimate and keeping divinity full, such as Anu's damage reduction on passive and imprint, or Minotaur's strong hit chance passive and imprint. Hell's kit was recently changed. I had recorded this prior to the change, so I'll leave it in as I thought the old kit was superior to the new one. I'll also talk about her new kit at the end and why I'm disappointed to see the changes. Okay, back to the past. On the other hand, I think that Hell has been underrated by most people. She often gets dismissed for having a niche kit due to her ultimate resurrecting the enemies and her passive requiring an ally or enemy being revived to increase the stacks of damage. It has also been debated whether her passive will carry over waves or not. For this reason, I went back and had a look through alpha footage and saw that it did carry across waves, although it could get changed. If it does get changed to not carry over waves, then I think she is a pretty bad hero overall. Hell's passive is what defines her kit. It has the potential to make her the best physical damage dealer in more situations than not. At 10 stacks, it will 2 times the total damage output, and if you put her imprint on herself, this will now 2.5 times her damage output. This is great, considering that her attack multipliers are excellent. She is one of these heroes where Mjolnir would absolutely smack, adding another 2.1 times multiplier to every third hit at max level. Although the main issue with Hell is that she needs to have defeated enemies or defeat enemies to revive with her ultimate to increase her passive. I don't see this as being much of a problem as most do. This is because most battles are guaranteed to have multiple enemies. The campaign will obviously have multiple waves of enemies and likely to have a strong version of a hero of some of the bosses with 4 other heroes as minions, similar to the alpha. The tower is mostly consisting of wave content, and I would guess most bosses in the game will either have minions or waves leading up to the boss where you can build this passive damage up. I think she could be used quite well apart from clan boss situations. Of course you could revive your allies, but this would probably be very hard to set up. And another scenario could be bosses reviving their own minions or adds, like how Ice Golem works in Raid. The other thing that is not mentioned often is that the revived enemies are confused for 2 turns, which will make them attack themselves and the boss and give you free damage towards the boss. But maybe the Fateless team has built even more depth around the confusability and has some of the adds with debuffs on their basic attacks, so it debuffs the boss or even better, reduce its stats. Similar to what Ares and Mulan's basic attacks do, where it reduces the target's defense by up to 20%. A downside of Hell is her aura. It's for arena battles only. I would have liked to have seen dungeons only for a few reasons. I don't see her doing too much in the arena. It seems the arena strategy for her is to pair her with 3 supports that keep reviving her and keeping the team alive until she has enough passive stacks of attack amp to out damage the enemy's team's healing, who has also built a team of healing tanks. Otherwise, she has no survivability and average skills for the arena. Whereas in dungeons, she has time to stack up her passive, can place defense down 2 on bosses, reduce the boss's healing, shield and barrier by 50%, and make the adds attack the boss. Overall, I would put her in low A tier, about 4 stars, if her passive carries over waves, and low B tier if it does not. Now, Hell had a rework to her kit, with some changes being positive and others not so much. Her basic ability has improved to now do an additional 5% enemy max HP if the target is under curse. This is a big upgrade from the previous effect of it only spreading curse. This is the only positive change I can see to her kit. The core ability has stayed the same, and so have all of her attack multipliers. Her ultimate has undergone a rework, and now after attacking she revives all defeated enemies and places a new disable named Shade on the target. Previously, it did the same except it placed Confuse on all enemies for 2 turns and the enemies were revived with just 10% HP. Although, we are still unsure if Shade is applied to all enemies, but I assume it should be, considering that it would be a massive detriment to revive an enemy without placing a disable on them. Shade is a strong disable, as it has a permanent duration and can only be removed by defeating the caster, which results in the shade being defeated again. So, the way shade works essentially is when an enemy is defeated before or during Hell's ultimate, it will revive them as a clone of that hero that only exists to join Hell in her basic attack. The shade cannot be targeted or attacked or take turns. Unfortunately, this ability does not work on boss minions. It will instead place defense down too. This makes shade only useful in PvP and waves. The main reason you would want this ability is to stop the enemy from reviving their team. It could do a decent job of this if you built Hell tanky, as it would make it hard for the enemy to defeat Hell to revive their allies. Although this is extremely niche and wastes her amazing attack multipliers, which synergized with her passive so well in the previous kit. And keep in mind, the previous skill of reviving enemies with Confuse also blocked revive, but only until the enemies are again defeated, so not as good. Some have theorized that she will do well in endgame PvP, where top teams may build really tanky reviving teams, and with Curse cutting down the shields and healing by 50%, plus having the potential to block revive with the shade ability, it could do really well. I remain on the fence with this idea. Now, the biggest change is her passive. It has changed from increasing attack 10% per ally or enemy revived up to 100%, to now increasing the turn meter fill effects by 20%, stacking up to 100%, which in my opinion is not great, as she does not have any built-in turn meter filling effects, not even with the awakenings, making this passive almost useless until you get a hero to fit this role, or you could equip a weapon or imprint that fills turn meter. Then I can see it synergizing well with her enemy max HP skill, as all you want to do with this skill is take as many turns as possible or join in as many attacks as possible. So unfortunately for me, she has gone from being potentially the strongest physical damage dealer throughout early to end game for boss content to a generally good early to mid game damage dealer to bosses with her basic, and then potentially a decent hero for PvP in certain niches. She will do okay on waves, again filling the niche in wave content where reviving and healing become a problem. I still think a starter hero will outdamage her by a fair margin in wave content due to the huge divinity cost on her ultimate, at least for the first few months to a year. Overall, I would still probably put her in the top of B tier. I do wish her passive was not changed. Next we have Morgan Le Fay. I'm not a fan of her kit at all. I think it's way overrated by many and doesn't synergize very well. I've seen many in the Discord saying she will smack and throw out a crazy amount of debuffs. So let's break down the kit and find out. We'll start with the core, specifically the damage multiplier. It's 150% of attack and 1200% accuracy. When you see a 1200% multiplier, you might think big damage, but that's far from reality. I'll show you this with simple math in a minute. Although keep in mind we are drawing stats from the alpha, some of these figures will vary at release, but it's likely to be fairly similar. Now, the best accuracy you could get in the alpha was about 445, with 90 coming from a maxed legendary weapon, 60 from 2 of the highest level helmets and gloves, then 30 from the other 4 pieces of armor. You'll also probably have about 40 base accuracy on your hero, which doesn't change as they level up. Then you could get another 75 accuracy from a 6-piece accuracy set. Not that this would ever happen, but we'll pretend it does and try and give this multiplier the best chance possible. So, with the highest accuracy possible on a 1200% damage multiplier, you would be doing 445 multiplied by 12, which is 5,340 damage before critical multipliers. This is very low for a Slayer. Although this is only half of the multipliers for this core attack, it also has a 150% attack multiplier. But since we have to sacrifice attack for accuracy, we will not reach 6k attack. Maybe somewhere in the ballpark of 4,000 to 5,000 instead. So a 150% multiplier on 5k attack is 7.5k damage, which again is low. Adding both multipliers together and you get 12.8k, which is very low when we compare it to an average Slayer with a 400% attack multiplier and 5 to 6k damage, which will do 24k before other multipliers are considered. Then, On top of that, you have to sacrifice a lot of your crit chance and crit damage for accuracy, as 2 of the armor pieces that give you accuracy are 2 of the 3 pieces that give you crit damage and crit chance. So, if you were to choose accuracy over crit, your damage will plummet. Plus, you must consider you have no additional damage modifiers on the 6-piece accuracy set. Both of these factors could again half the damage output of Morgan when she is in a high accuracy build. That then makes it 12.8k versus 48k. She at the moment is looking to do about 1/4 of the physical damage of other slayers if you choose to do a high accuracy build. Although I would suggest only getting enough accuracy required to land your debuffs. This should allow you to do up to half the physical damage of a regular slayer rather than 1/4. In order for accuracy multiplier to hit closer to a normal legendary slayer, it would probably need to be in the range of 3000 to 4000% multiplier on the accuracy. Of course, this is all subject to change as there is balancing to come. Now, you might not care too much about Morgan's physical damage as she places damaging debuffs on her core, and maybe this will offset her poor physical damage. I don't think this will be the case for a few reasons. First of all, her only skill that applies debuffs is a core on a 3 or 4 turn cooldown, and once fully upgraded it hits 3 times on all enemies with a 75% chance of placing one of either Acid, Blaze or Aether Burn on each hit, or a stack of bleed if the first or second hit applied Blaze, Aether Burn or Acid already. As you can't have more than 1 stack of these buffs, it would make sense to assume this is how the debuffs work, as the wording is unclear. So on average, that's less than 2 unique buffs on each target per use of the core. It's okay, but not great. There is no buff extension, so this means that the enemies will have naturally activated these debuffs prior to the core being ready to use again. Which doesn't seem too bad until you consider her basic ability activates 1 random debuff on each enemy. This becomes somewhat redundant at this point if the activation removes a stack of the debuff, although the bleed may always remain and get activated. But at the slow rate it is applied, it will likely do very little. Of course, you could pair her with some other heroes that apply debuffs, but this again isn't a great look for Morgan. The basic also applies vulnerable too, but unfortunately this maxes out at a 50% chance. It is also an AoE basic attack, but again suffers from low multipliers. Then there is the ultimate, which seems counterintuitive to the kit. It removes all 4 types of debuffs the core place for bonus damage. The main issue is for the next 2 turns before the core comes off cooldown, the enemies won't have any damaging debuffs and the basic attack effects will be pointless. The core is likely to be on a full cooldown when you use the ultimate ability, as you will want to have as many stacks available to maximize the damage amp. While we are talking about damage amp, there are another 3 issues of consideration. Firstly, you need to remove 5 debuffs to get any damage amp. So this means in a solo boss encounter, it will just remove the buffs for no extra damage and significantly reduce overall damage. The second issue is that you need to remove 20 debuffs to get the 100% turn meter fill. This may only be possible when you are facing 5 or more enemies, as none of these debuffs stack like poisons do in raid. It is also impossible to get more than 15 debuffs without an extra hero placing them, as they will wear off before rotating back to the core. Thirdly, the damage amp is only plus 25% per 5 debuffs removed, and don't forget this damage amp is increasing an underpowered multiplier, therefore making it again less useful, and it's highly unlikely to outdamage the removed debuffs, therefore it would be wise to just completely avoid using this ultimate. Finally, there is her passive, which seems decent on her other than the 5% damage amp from Acid. Otherwise, the imprint seems decent. Overall, I would suggest avoiding Morgan as a starter hero. I do think she'll get adjusted quite a lot, even prior to early access starting. Now on to the next underrated hero, Ra. I think Ra is underrated for similar reasons that Adam highlighted in his recent hero rankings video. Ra has such a nice flowing kit. He places Blaze consistently and for a lot of turns and activates it without consuming stacks of the Blaze. He also has debuffs to amplify Blaze damage as well as a debuff to amplify physical damage. And unlike Morgan, he has decent damage multipliers for a Slayer. Although like Morgan, Mathematically, the accuracy multipliers do almost nothing to help his damage. For Ra, it will likely add less than 5% additional damage on top of the 360% attack multiplier on his core. The main downside to Ra's kit is that the defense down 2 and vulnerable 2 debuffs only have a 3 times 50% chance to land, which over the 3 hits calculates to about 87.5% chance of landing them on average. I do really like Ra's passive. It increases his next ultimate's damage by 5% every time Blaze is activated, removed, or expires on enemies and allies. This is great, as Blaze is an ability that suits encounters with multiple enemies, thus making the passive suit these situations. This also applies to his core, where if he defeats an enemy, it reduces his core cooldown by 1 turn, which is likely to happen where you would use Ra. As mentioned previously, Blaze is suited to encounters with multiple enemies, although his core only goes down to a 4-turn cooldown instead of the normal 3-turn. Once again, likely due to having the ability to reduce his own cooldown with defeating enemies with his core. Another thing that makes up for the 4-turn cooldown on the core is the low divinity cost on his ultimate. He will have this ultimate very quickly, potentially every 2 turns depending on his divinity generator. This will allow an almost constant uptime of vulnerable 2 and defense down 2. Overall, I think I would rate Ra about 4 stars. His kit just seems to flow so well, and he should excel at what he is built to do. On the other hand, there is Lamashtu, an awesome sounding kit that looks like a lot of fun, but on further inspection, it does not look like it'll work as intended, or at least how I've heard others describe how they see her kit being used. On top of that, the AoE damage multipliers are really low with conditional effects that are not easy to achieve and that have a damage payoff that only equalizes her core damage with other slayers. Then there is the passive, which also seems really cool, but also significantly undertuned for damage. The first thing I want to address is the idea of having her as a wave clearer or a wave farming hero. This idea has been floated around as she resets her core if she defeats 3 or more heroes with it. So theoretically, she can just blast through all 3 waves with her core back to back. This sounds nice, but I don't see it happening with a measly 300% attack multiplier on the core. Sure, you could increase its damage by 50% by killing an enemy first with a basic, taking it up to a 450% multiplier, but if you were to do this, you would likely just get piled on by the other 3 enemies, unless you had more than double their speed. So, in saying this, I don't really see the wave clearing potential unless you're going up against very low level content compared to where your account is up to. The other big problem is the passive's damage. It does 100% of attack damage to all enemies when this hero defeats an enemy. It ignores 100% of the enemy's defense, but cannot be a critical hit. Unfortunately, 100% of attack damage is a bit low when it's not amplified by a crit, strong hit, or other damage enhancing effects, especially when it requires the condition of defeating an enemy. Compare it to an average core attack of a Slayer, which is about 400% attack. Then add a decent critical multiplier of 250%, which multiplies damage by 3.5 times. That ends up being 14 times the damage of this passive ability before defense reduces it, which may end up making it around 7 to 10 times instead of 14 times. So overall, the passive, in my opinion, is a little bit underpowered. Although the ultimate looks like it could put in a lot of work in niche boss encounters that have many minions, like Spider in Raid. This is because the ultimate activates a passive damaging effect for each defeated enemy, with an additional effect of a 70% chance of placing acid and vulnerable 2 on all enemies for 2 turns per trigger. So if you have 6 defeated enemies, the damage would be very significant, and on top of this, she applies attack up 2 prior to using her ultimate, which will boost the damage of not only her attack, but the passive's damage too. Overall, I think Lamashtu is quite niche. I don't think she will excel in farming waves, or arena, or even most boss encounters. Although I do think she could shine in boss encounters with many minions that she can make explode. I would rank her 3-star. With all this being said, there is still a lot of information missing, and this is only my opinion of these heroes and purely speculation of what is to come. So you should still consider this information when picking your hero from the minigame, but at the end of the day, pick a hero that excites you. All of this is still subject to change, and some of this is just theory as well. Thanks for tuning in.